Yeah, I didn't know how many people would stick with us or with this class after we talked about suffering so much. But let's just start with a few minutes of meditation on the breath, arriving here with our mind. Just being present with the sensation of the breath. And bring to our awareness the 7 billion other people on this planet. Countless other beings, insects, animals, fish, birds. Feeling the interconnectedness of all of us. What we do affects them. What they do affects us. Not separate. And we can feel that interconnection at our heart level. Fellow brothers and sisters on this planet. How we're all suffering on gross or subtle levels. Sickness or oppression, job problems or relationship problems, physical pain, stress, dissatisfaction. On the subtlest level, having these aggregates, having a body and mind embedded within it, potential for pain. wish, our fullest potential. And that we can be ourselves and others. This world that badly needs it. So we've been talking about the nature of samsara, the first noble truth. True sufferings or true dukkha, fundamental dissatisfactory nature of samsara. Samsara, which is the condition of being, under the power of afflictions and karma, particularly taking rebirth over and over again under the force of afflictions and karma. And this condition of being in samsara is fundamentally dissatisfactory and always carries with it. As long as we have mental afflictions, there's the potential. As long as we have mental afflictions, we are likely to create further and further causes. And as long as we have mental afflictions, we create negative karma. So samsara, so we contemplate the disadvantages of samsara. We contemplate the problematic nature of samsara. We contemplate the dissatisfactory nature of samsara. Not to depress us, but to inspire us to look somewhere else. Instead of perpetuating the cycle of dissatisfaction and suffering, there's an alternative. If there wasn't an alternative, then there's no point in looking at the suffering. But since there's an alternative, so contemplating the suffering nature of samsara helps nudge us in the direction of trying something different, working on our minds, trying to uproot reduce and then ultimately uproot our mental afflictions and grasping of the solid. So the idea is to stop putting our deepest hopes into the things that don't work. Samsaric pleasures, possessions and money and relationships and status and career and houses and jobs will never bring us final satisfaction. They can bring us some temporary pleasure, some temporary comfort, temporary happiness, but they're impermanent and they're not in the nature of happiness. As we talked about last week, they're called the suffering of change. They are merely a temporary relief from a previous. Having good company, being with our friends is a temporary relief from, right, loneliness or boredom. But, you know, having hanging out with friends, we do that, you know, hour after hour, after hour, after hour, after hour, right? Eventually we get tired. Eventually we get irritated. Others, right there, that is not the ultimate. So constantly trying to find our happiness in the samsara pleasures is a never-ending effort. We'll never find in samsara. So if we want stable, lasting happiness, if we want that happily ever after, then we need to look in our minds. We need to remove the causes. No longer we want no more problems and no more neurosis, etc. We need to remove the causes. So before I do that, so the idea is ultimately to try to develop renunciation. Well, which is very difficult. So contemplating the suffering nature of samsara, first of all, is helpful for us to develop more realistic expectations. Right? Let go of our unrealistic expectations of samsara bringing us predictable happiness, letting go of the expectation that things should go a particular way. Yeah, and working with our minds and preparing. So when we understand the nature of samsara, we prepare our minds for things to go wrong. We prepare our minds for disappointment. We prepare our minds for getting sick. We prepare our minds for people being cooperative. We prepare our minds for all of the challenges of samsara, which, you know, we've all encountered, right, and the world has encountered in spades, especially in 2020. So let go of our unrealistic expectations and we put more energy into working on our minds, developing realistic expectations, and loosening our attachments and our other mental. And then ultimately to try to develop some level of renunciation. So it was the long-term endeavor, right? Renunciation, like no longer putting our deepest hope into samsara pleasures and successes. And instead putting our deepest hopes self-grasping, letting go of our self-centeredness, cherishing others more. And then loosening our grip, right? Loosening our grip and being more easygoing, not needing to have. Then, right, the fewer mental afflictions we have, the easier our life is. The more mental afflictions we have, the deeper, stronger mental affliction we have, the more suffering we experience, more pain, problems we experience. So we try to develop renunciation, and then in the Mahayana, we don't stop at renunciation. We try to expand our hearts out to all other beings who are in the same boat, and develop more and more compassion for others. And rather than wishing for liberation for ourselves alone, we wish to free all beings, or to help free all beings from suffering. And so renunciation and bodhicitta like genuine renunciation and bodhicitta depends on really understanding the nature of samsara, really understanding the nature of suffering, right? Not just the gross suffering of people getting sick, people suffering from heartbreak and all of the other gross suffering. But understanding the subtlest nature of samsara, that as long as we're in samsara, under the control of karma and afflictions, and always have the potential. So even for those people who everything is going well for them right now, and laugh, still in samsara. So we can develop even compassion for those beings who are on top of the world right now. So ultimately, we don't want to stop at renunciation. We try to expand our hearts out to others and understand they're going through the same thing. To practice for them. Okay, then we'll move on to the second noble truth. So, Dana, if we can go to the slide number 5. So, true origins or the true causes of suffering, as we've talked about, and a number of times, suffering, all of the suffering of samsara, all the suffering we experience, according to Buddhism, is due to karma and the affliction, contaminated karma and the mental affliction. Thank you. Yeah. Contaminated karma, particularly negative karma, that we create under the control of mental affliction. So, while we're under the control of a mental affliction, while we're under the control of anger or attachment or jealousy or fear, or anxiety, or miserliness, or belligerence, or resentment, etc., then we are off. Well, then we tend to create negative karma, which brings about the future undesirable circumstances, future pain. While we're under the control of mental afflictions, first of all, our mind is agitated, then oftentimes we create negative karma, which results in future sin. So we don't create negative karma, we don't create negative actions if our minds are free from mental affliction, right? If our minds are feeling peaceful, if our minds are feeling content, if our minds are feeling full of love, we don't, right? We don't lash out at other people. We don't, insult other people. We don't speak. We don't lie. We don't. It's only when we're under the control or the influence of a mental affliction, then, right, when we're angry, then we're likely, when we're attached, maybe we're cheat, attack, lie. We can see so much of that in the world, and we can see that in our own lives if we want to. So, how do we get rid of negative karma? Well, we can. So the path to, we'll say it this way, the path to greater and greater happiness is to stop creating negative karma as much as we can, reduce it, and create more and more positive karma, which will bring about the positive. But as long as we have mental afflictions, we'll still create negative karma. So we have to work on the mental afflictions. And of those two, karma and the mental afflictions, it's the afflictions that are the main causes. And we're going to talk about. And then underneath the mental affliction, right, the root cause of the mental affliction, the root is a fundamental misunderstanding. The belief in a concrete, separate self and other phenomena we talked about. So today I'd like to focus on the affliction. Next slide.
I just want to make sure everybody can see the full slide and not the presenter's view. Okay.
I think I can see the full slide.
Thank you, Anthony.
And is everybody hearing me okay?
Better this week. Better,
Okay.
yeah.
Good. Just let me know if you can't. All right. So the afflictions, I mean, I think you all, you've all received teaching on the afflictions before, so I'll try not to go in too much detail, but it's a good reminder. It's useful to hear again and again. So, other common translations for the Sanskrit term klesha. So the Sanskrit term klesha is translated as afflictions or mental afflictions. Sometimes it's delusions, sometimes it's disturbing emotions. So just so you know, I mean, I oftentimes use these terms, different terms, right? They're interchangeable in general. So afflictions, what's a mental affliction? I'll read the definition of a mental affliction from Asanga, and then we'll actually talk about it. So this presentation is from one of the seminal texts of Mahayana Buddhism, which is Asanga's Compendium of Knowledge, or Abhidharma Samachaya. He says the definition of an affliction is a phenomenon such that when it arises, the characteristic of being very unpeaceful arises. And due to its arising, the mental continuum arises very unpeaceful. So the affliction itself brings unpeacefulness. So we can see that very easily with anger, right? So the mind, when there's no mental affliction, right? So the mind, actually, just back up. So the mind is fundamentally pure according to Buddhism, and the mental afflictions are not intrinsic to the nature of the mind. They're not intrinsic to the nature of mind. So they can be removed. Okay? Right. So we're not, like, anger is not intrinsic to the mind, and it can actually be removed. Attachment is not intrinsic to the mind. Ignorance is not intrinsic to the mind, it can be removed. And we have many moments when a mental affliction is not manifestly arising. Right? When we're sitting there peacefully eating our breakfast, or sitting out on the porch, or taking a hike, or hanging out, maybe with our friends. Our mind is nice and peaceful and calm when a mental affliction is not present, is not manifest, is not manifestly arising. But as soon as the affliction arises, it brings unpeacefulness. That is the very nature of a mental affliction, is it brings unpeace, unrest, it brings agitation. It's like the mind without a mental affliction is like a nice, calm lake. And when a mental affliction arises, it's like boiling water, like starting to boil, or a pot of water starting to boil. And it can be vigorous boiling, like rage and strong anger, belligerence, right? Or it could be very subtle, dissatisfaction, rest. Attachment is unpeaceful. We may not even notice the attachment. So the mental affliction by its nature just, brings unpeacefulness to the mind, disturbance to the mind, agitation to the mind. Also, there's a tension. We can be nice and relaxed and spacious. Then when the mental affliction arises, then we may notice our shoulders get tight, maybe your jaw gets tight, chest might get tight. We're relaxing, and then suddenly we remember that, the unkind thing that person said, what that person at work did. Or we start worrying, right? We're sleeping, and then we wake up in the middle of the night worrying about something, may intense, right? So that worry agitates the mind, it disturbs the mind. And we may not be able to sleep, we may not be able to sit still. And then the other thing with the mental afflictions, they can be hard to let go of. We've all experienced that. Mental affliction arises, and we know intellectually, I shouldn't, this is not helpful. It's not helpful to worry, or I shouldn't get angry, but it's not so simple. Mental affliction takes over, and it creates peacefulness in the mind. When it arises, and even for hours and even days afterwards, it can continue to make the mind, right? It's like if we've been really angry, right? It may take a few days to really settle the mind down. Even if the anger is no longer foremost in our minds, right? Even if we've allowed the anger to dissipate, there's a certain energy, unsettled, agitated. Okay. Yeah. So according to Buddhism, the afflictions are the primary cause of our unhappiness. Primary cause of all the pain and problems. Slide number 7. She Rapton says, afflictions are responsible for every form of suffering and discontent. There's a pretty unambiguous statement. And then the next slide, the Dalai Lama says, the most important thing for us to know is that afflictive emotion, another translation, afflictive emotion is our ultimate enemy and source of suffering. Once it develops within our mind, it immediately destroys our peace of mind and eventually destroys our health, even our friendships with others. All negative activities such as killing, bullying, cheating, etc., stem from afflictive emotion. This, therefore, is our real enemy. So this is the main point we have to realize. The real destroyer of our happiness is always there. I remember the first time I read this quote years ago, it really struck me. The real destroyer of our happiness is there within us. It's so easy to look outwards for the cause of our pain. And not to say that external conditions don't contribute to our pain. Of course they do. It's just that if we didn't have a mental affliction, then that external difficult situation would not have the power to disturb us. And our practice is to try more and more to not let the external situation disturb the peace. You know, not to say that we stick our head in the sand, and it's not to say that we develop indifference. We don't want to develop indifference, right? We care and we want to do what we can to help the situation. We try not to let it disturb our minds in a fundamental way. Try to keep some level of peace. Ultimately, right, when we're fully enlightened, then it won't disturb our minds. That's a long ways away for most of us. Well, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's a long way.
Yeah, I think that last part of that last sentence is so difficult, you know, I think it's a big pill to swallow that all my problems are of my own making, right? That if I'm unhappy or disturbed, that it's something within me. And I appreciated that you said that, you know, external events or situations certainly affect us, but sometimes it's really hard to see what's happening and how it disturbs me and realize that the answer lies within me and not outside of me, you know?
It's really hard to see that, and it's hard to want to see that. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that we can look at it in an empowering way, like not in a blaming way, right? Not like, oh, well, I'm to blame for everything that's problematic in my life, or you know, for all of my unhappiness or dissatisfaction. But I think in an empowering way that I can change it. I can change my mind. I can make myself happy. I'm not dependent on other people to make me happy. I'm not dependent on people changing in order to be happy. I think that, I mean, for me, that's a constructive way of looking at it. And I think it's really, really important to not look at it and beating ourselves up, blaming ourselves or blaming others, but trying to look at it in a constructive, empowering way. But the other thing is, right, so seeing that all the difficult circumstances are a result of afflictions and the karma that we've created, right? Because the external circumstances, like the external circumstances that we're experiencing, right, according to Buddhism, are all, right, they're all a result of karma. There's all a result, and everything that we experience is a result of karma that we've created, actions that we've created. And that is really, really difficult, right? It's difficult to prove, right? Impossible to prove. And it's something to think about, and it's very difficult to swallow. And it's something to think about, and karma is such a huge subject, right? And there's a whole nother module in Discovering Buddhism on. So I don't want to get into karma in any detail today, but this statement is also related to karma, because the afflictions are the ultimate destroyer of our happiness. Because the afflictions caused us to create the negative karma, which resulted in the situation. And we have to think about, we really have to think about that, I think, for a long period of time, whether or not it really makes sense that everything is real, right, everything we experience. And it's useful to look at all the various possibilities, right? Is it like, why is this happening? Is this problem happening? Is it because of, is it random? Is there no, right? Is there, like, are there no causes and conditions for problems to happen and things just happen randomly? Or are there causes and conditions that bring about the problems? Or is it God that that's giving us the, the pain in our lives? Right, like, what do we think? It's very useful to look, to really examine, okay, so what makes the most sense? Why are these things happening? And so the Buddhist view is it's not random and it's not God, it's causes and conditions, and karma being the main cause, as well as many other conditions. So, so yeah, kind of a long way to say, yes, this is really difficult to swallow. And I think it takes a lot of time and a lot of thinking. Whether that statement is really true. What's the real cause of suffering, and is the real destroyer of our happiness?
It strikes me that when I think about it recently, that all I can really grasp at, sorry, that's an unfortunate word, is the karma is mental habits, right? It's our reaction. It's how we view things, right? It's our karmic tendencies. Is it really like a rock falling on me is somehow stored karmically, and one day the conditions ripen for the rock to fall on my foot? I can't get my head around that concept.
Yeah. And it's yeah, and I don't want to go down this road too much. But yeah, I mean, karma itself, right, is the mental factor of intention, right? It's a mental impulse that's creating an imprint on our minds. I think it's easier to understand karma the more we understand emptiness. The karma, right, is said to ripen primarily in the form of experience, right? In the form of a pleasant or unpleasant experience, or a pleasant or unpleasant feeling. So a positive karma, right, is like when we create positive karma, we're creating a positive imprint on our consciousness that results in a future experience of pleasure.
And I don't want to distract you, but
yeah.
is all positive, even positive karma, though, is created from a grasping mind, right? A non-empty, a non-realization of emptiness, right?
Yeah, it's positive contaminated karma.
Yeah, right.
So that's a whole other subject. If people are interested in a class on karma, we can always schedule one. Big subject. Yeah. The other thing that came to my mind with regard to this statement, the real destroyer of our happiness is always there within us, is that sometimes we're in a difficult, right? We're going through a difficult time. We're in a difficult situation where there's nothing we can do to change the situation. And in those kinds of situations, I find those the really useful to, like, in those situations, it becomes very obvious to me that I can't change the external situation. The only thing I can do is change my mind. The only thing that will help is to change my mind. And when we have success around that, right? It's like really, really like we're going through, right, a really difficult situation at work, difficulty at, you know, in our relationship, or for example, like, right, when a loved one is sick or dying, there's nothing we can do about it, right? Then we see that we can make ourselves miserable, we can make ourselves okay with our own mind. I mean, I remember what my friends, earlier we were talking about my friend, you know, friends Jack and Judith, and so they're kind of on mind, right? There, some years ago, their house burned down to the ground. They were fortunately away at the time. They came back and their house was gone. Right? And it was, really struck me that, you know, the way they handled it, right? It, you know, it could have been utterly devastating for, you know, for most people. For them, like, okay. And I think, like, I remember Judith was kind of relieved. Okay, so now we don't have all of that stuff, albatross on the back. So something like that, right? Your house burns down and we can make ourselves miserable by lamenting and getting angry, etc. Or we could try to let go and try to be happy. And I think as we get older, right, and as our bodies, you know, become less spry, you know, it becomes more and more important to work with our minds.
I heard a story of a guy that was one of the foremost collectors of Coca-Cola junk memorabilia. And he had it in a barn and the barn burned down. And he said it was the most liberating thing ever.
Right. I mean, I can understand that. I'd love to have a lot of my stuff. But anyway, yeah. So we'll move on, but that's something to ponder. That's something for us to ponder for a while, the real destroyer of our happiness. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So actually yeah, let's go. So there's a presentation of the 6 causes of mental afflictions. And the first three causes are necessary for an affliction to arise. And then numbers 4, 5, and 6, they tend to increase the chances. You know, they're not absolutely necessary, but they tend to increase the chances for afflictions to arise. They feed the affliction, or they can increase the amount. So the first necessary condition for an affliction to rise is the seed, or the potential for a mental affliction. So we all have the seed or the potential for a mental affliction until we become liberated from cyclic existence, until we become an arhat, until we become an 8th bodhisattva, you know, a 8th bodhisattva, reach the 8th bodhisattva ground. So we have the seeds of the mental afflictions, and we only begin to remove the seeds or the potential when we directly realize emptiness. When we directly realize emptiness, we start we start to remove the mental afflictions from the root. You know, we start to remove their seeds. And then through familiarity over time, then the seeds are completely removed. When the arhat or an 8th bodhisattva bhumi, then the seeds are removed. until then, the potential for mental afflictions are always there. Second condition for a mental affliction to arise is the object, right? The object of the affliction, the object of attachment, the object of anger, the object of jealousy, the object of worry. The object, either a physical encounter with the object, right? A physical encounter with the annoying person, or a physical, right? Or a physical encounter with the desirous object, the ice cream, or the beautiful shiny object, or bringing the object to our minds, right? So we don't have to be in physical proximity to the object for mental affliction to arise. If we bring the object to mind, then that can bring about a mental affliction. And we see, actually, a lot of the time our mental afflictions arise because we're cogitating about the object of worry, or the object of anger, or the object of attachment, cogitating about it over and over and over and over again, keeping that object in our mind. That brings up, that the more we cogitate about the object, the greater the mental affliction. And then the third condition is called inappropriate attention, and I find this one super interesting, for inappropriate mental attention, or exaggeration. So technically speaking, and generally speaking, inappropriate attention is said to be a mind that dwells on a contaminated object and exaggerates its apparent quality. So the mind that dwells on the object and then exaggerates its quality, its apparent quality. So this is very interesting in that all mental afflictions involve this inappropriate attention. All mental afflictions involve exaggeration. And this is another hard pill to swallow. Is our attachment is always exaggerating something. Our anger is always exaggerating something. Our arrogance is exaggerating something. Our jealousy is exaggerating something. So one thing is that, the afflictions and this inappropriate attention is a conceptual mind, right? It's a mind that's looking at an object conceptually and cogitating about it. It's conceptual, and it's not seeing things in an accurate. I'll talk about the exaggeration in a second. One more thing I want to say about dwelling. So the inappropriate attention and mental affliction dwells on the object that's in our mind. And we can get stuck in that object. And it's difficult to move the mind away from the object. Right? It's like we're angry at someone and we're perseverating, we're ruminating over and over and over again about what they did wrong. And it's difficult to bring our mind away from that object and that what they did wrong. And maybe we apply an antidote and temporarily our minds, calm down, and then boom, we're back at ruminating about what they did wrong again. So there's this, we're dwelling in the object, and it's difficult for us to let go. It's difficult for us to move the mind away from the object. The mind becomes quite obsessed with anger, with worry, etc. Okay, so exaggeration. So there are many possible ways, levels of how we exaggerate the qualities of the object, or how we're exaggerating, how the the mind of a mental affliction is exaggerated. So it could be a very subtle exaggeration, such as grasping to, and then or it could be something very gross where we're exaggerating the negative qualities of the person. So we'll notice, you may notice, when we're angry, we're so narrowly focused on what they did wrong, or that faults of that person. And we're not able to see in a balanced way, right? The person seems to be 100% negative, or 100, right? Like the whole image of, okay, when we're angry, we're looking at an image of that person in our mind, and that image is completely colored by, with a negative hue, right? What they did wrong and how they always do that, and they did that last week and then that 6 months ago, and right, so we're not seeing that person, that person in a balanced and accurate way. We're forgetting about all of the times they have been kind and all of the times they've been considerate. Right? When we're in the midst of anger, we're just focused on an image in our mind that's negative. Right? So there's an exaggeration of the only negative in that moment, and then once the anger subsides, then we see them in a more balanced way again. But in the midst of anger, it's really hard to stretch our minds and remember their positive qualities. We don't want to. We're stuck in the negative view that we have. Right? So there's an exaggeration. So anger is usually exaggerating the negative qualities of the object. And with attachment, we're exaggerating the positive of that. Person is the kindest person in the world, the most beautiful person. Food is the most delicious thing. Or the house we want to buy is the most beautiful house. Right? That's a very gross exaggeration. But oftentimes our afflictions aren't that grossly exaggerated. But also another one is that we think that the attractiveness is in the object. The attractiveness actually comes from our mind. The attractiveness is not an intrinsic quality to the object. The attractiveness is not in the object. It comes from our mind. It's our perspective. If the attractiveness was in the object, then everyone would see it as attractive. Right? And we would always see it as attractive. But when we're in a bad mood, right, if it's let's say it's our new iPhone that looks so beautiful, so it's such a great thing, right? If it was intrinsically attractive, when it's malfunctioning, we would still see it as being, so attractive. But right, the attractiveness is not in the object, and that's very difficult to see in the midst of the attachment. I think the attractiveness is in the person. In the food, the deliciousness is in the food, but the deliciousness, the attractiveness, our mind. Yeah. So, so that's inappropriate attention. So those first three, to see the object and inappropriate attention, are necessary for an affliction. Any comments about that inappropriate attention, that exaggeration? Anybody disagree?
No.
Yeah, I think it's a great reminder for me.
It's useful to remind ourselves, when we're in the midst of an affliction, like, what am I exaggerating?
Hmm.
And oftentimes when we're in the midst of an affliction, we're not exaggerating anything. I'm saying it exactly the way it is.
It's interesting because I've been trying to be aware of this with I don't get in too many political conversations because I'm not interested in doing that. But it's been interesting when people talk about the president. I really try to think about these things, right? Am I exaggerating? He's not all bad, right? There's some redeeming qualities. And but what's interesting is that, when you're around other people, they also will feed into that exaggeration, which then makes it so much more difficult for me as an individual to stop giving it that inappropriate attention,
Yeah.
But he is a cause of pain, right? He's a cause of discord and hate and intolerance. So he may not be intrinsically evil, but he's a force of suffering, right? So I think it's legit to not necessarily argue with people, because that's pointless unless they're really going to change their mind. But I don't feel it's inappropriate to see him for what I believe he is.
May I say, Emily, this brings up a point of how one object supposedly is created by our mind, but it's reinforced by the group perspective. You know what I'm saying? You have a person, and the majority of the people have a certain perspective in it, and it self-perpetuates that perspective. It's very hard to pull out of yourself and see the reality in that, Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to get at, Jackie. Thank you.
And if we look at number 5 on this list, another condition is how do I word that? Distraction and being influenced by others. Okay. So so if we're hanging out with people, or if we're hanging out on social media with people who are reinforcing anger, hatred toward the president or somebody else, right? That reinforces that reinforces the mental affliction and reinforces our view. So to John's point, is that the thing is with anger is that we're with the inappropriate attention, like let's say anger toward our president, since that's the example that came up, right? Our inappropriate attention, our anger is viewing the president as being intrinsically bad or intrinsically evil, as Dana was saying. Whereas, if we look at him, in a more accurate way, right, he's a constantly changing phenomenon, right? That's a result of many causes and conditions coming together, and is engaging in certain actions, behaviors that are harming others, right? So there's this, there's more of a fluidity, there's more of a, seeing kind of the different factors involved, right? His Holiness the Dalai Lama, encourages us to look at all of the different causes and conditions, right, that are coming together, right? And it's, if we remember that he's just a product of his education and his upbringing, and right, and he's acting out of mental afflictions, and right, so we can have compassion for him, and we can disagree with his behaviors that are harming others, and right, our compassionate action is try to do something if we can to counteract the harmful behaviors, right? So we can do that without the anger, but the anger, we look at anger, the object of our anger looks very solid and unchanging, singular, right? And bad from its own side. So the more we can break down that image in our minds of him or our object of anger being this concrete, singular thing with, that bad from its own side, the more chance we have to dissolve the anger and engage in more constructive way of feeling. I don't know. I mean, it didn't really come out very clearly. I think didn't come out of my mouth very clearly. But
No, I think it's really good the way you said it. And I guess not to have compassion, right, for people who feel differently, even if you feel that they're completely wrong. They too, had reasons that got them into this sort of reactionary, scared state, right? I mean, that's the way I look at it anyway. I'm trying to understand what makes people support him, right? Like, how did you get to this point? You know what I mean?
Yeah, good for you. I think that's so helpful, right? Instead of being stuck in our own perspective, trying to understand what's going on for the other person. The other person is, probably, hey, they have their own reasons. They have valid reasons.
Just the pace of change, right? It's so rapid that it scares people, I think.
Yeah. So it's a tricky balance, right? Trying to have compassion for the others while also disagreeing with and even trying to counteract the negative behaviors. Distinguishing between the person and the behavior. Yeah, not having compassion for the behavior. Violence. Having compassion for the person. Yeah, it's such a big subject, right? It's such a relevant subject right now.
Well, it sounds kind of like hate, right? Hate the sin, but love the sinner in a way. Isn't that kind of a Christian?
Yeah. Right, and Shanti Deva says, well, if you have to be angry, right, at least get angry at the affliction, right? Don't get angry at the person, but get angry at their. Okay, so let me just bring up a couple. Well, we'll finish number 5. So distraction or being influenced by others. So this is, so it's very helpful, right, to try to be careful who we, like what we watch on TV and how much, like social media, how much we expose ourselves to negative influences. Because none of us are completely immune to the negative effects. Well, I shouldn't say. I mean, beware of the negative effects of, right, of our environment and other people. And so until we're able to have, control over, our minds and not be negatively influenced, then it's useful to limit the negative influences we expose ourselves to. So with number 4, another cause of the mental afflictions is familiarity, right? If we're very accustomed to getting angry, right, we have a habit, right, a strong habit of getting angry again and again and again. Whenever, right, we're in traffic or we're denied what we want, right? Because of that familiarity, that will contribute to the arising. someone who's habituated to anger will be, much more likely to have anger arise. Somebody cuts them off on the road than someone who's not, doesn't have that. And then the last, so there are different, I've seen a couple of different versions of this list, but the last point here in one list is bad habits. So this is talking, I think, largely about habits that contribute to our arising of mental afflictions. Like if we have a habit of drinking too much, getting drunk, that's more likely to have mental afflictions. We've got a habit of gambling or hanging out in seedy places. Those, or also habits of like smoking can affect the mental afflictions, or bad mental habits. So if we have a habit of, so we have a habit of always looking at what's wrong in the situation, the negative side of the situation, that's more likely to bring about anger and irritation. Or if we have a habit of feeling sorry for ourselves, that will bring about more mental. So those last three, familiarity, distraction, and being influenced by others, and bad habits, contribute to. So it's useful to look at these and see which, what bad habits we might have, what bad influences we have. And the distraction part of number 5 is, not being mindful, right? If we're not being mindful, we can easily fall into a mental affliction without even knowing it. Whereas if we remain mindful and aware of what's going on in our minds, we're likely to catch the affliction early and we're drowning in it. All right. So any further comments or questions on the causes of the afflictions? So let's move on. The next, so I'm not going to dwell on these next slides, but so the afflictions have, there are many different lists. If we talk about the 3 root afflictions or the 3 poisons, right? The attachment, aversion or anger or hatred, and ignorance or confusion. And then there's a list of the 6 root afflictions in the next slide. Attachment, anger, ignorance, pride, afflicted doubt, and afflicted views, which I'm not going to go into in this class. Big discussion. And so all of the other afflictions, there's 20 secondary afflictions in the Abhidharma, Samuccaya, which are derivatives of those 6 root afflictions or those 3 poisons. And belligerence, resentment, concealment, spite, jealousy, miserliness, manipulation, haughtiness, harmfulness, non-shame, non-embarrassment, lethargy, excitement, non-faith, laziness, non-conscientiousness, forgetfulness, non-introspection, and distraction. Some of those are very interesting, and maybe we wouldn't think that they're necessarily mental afflictions. But anyway, that's just to give you the list of them without going into them. So I thought that what we would do is talk about, and there's another, we might not have time for attachment today. Just how to deal with the afflictions, the disturbing emotions in general. So this goes back to John's question from the very beginning. So according to Buddhism, and actually we can take down the slides for now. This isn't in the slides. And so in Buddhism, the best way of working with mental afflictions is the middle way between kind of two extremes. Acting it out, right? Like engaging in it, feeding the affliction and acting it out. And the other extreme is suppressing it. Denying that we have it. So both of those we're trying to avoid, right? And it's not talked about that much, we're trying not to suppress the emotion or be in denial about it. And personally, I think that a lot of us do tend to suppress afflictions because we think, right, we hear that they're bad, and right, especially anger, and so we're not angry, or maybe we don't even admit to ourselves that we're angry, and so we're kind of trying to sit on the lid of the boiling water, right? No, I'm not angry. But suppressing the emotion is not the recommended route. Right? When we suppress something, right, it's going to explode sooner or later, right? Right, like the pressure cooker. Pressure will build up until, all of a sudden, right, we may explode, or, explode at the seemingly littlest thing, right? So that's a result of our suppressed emotion. So the idea is not to suppress the emotion, and it's to not, engage in it and act it out, but it involves, first of all, right, so the Buddhist way of dealing with emotions involves, first of all, acknowledging that we have that emotion. Like acknowledging the object. Arrogance, right? First of all, acknowledging it. We can't work constructively with it unless we acknowledge it. And acknowledging it without judgment, acknowledging without being harsh on ourselves, acknowledging it, observing it, trying to just notice it, non-judgmentally, notice it, with kindness toward ourselves. We will have mental affliction, and we're going to have mental affliction for a long time, right? So, acknowledging that that's part of our, as being, being in Samsara. Had them for a long time. Everybody else has them too, right? It's just, it's something we've had since beginningless time, according to Buddhism. So, so they're going to be difficult to let go of. Time, it's going to take effort. And so having a kind attitude, a realistic attitude, acknowledging when it arises, and then working with antidotes to overcome them, reduce them. It may involve just dissolving it as we see it. If we have a strong Mahamudra or Dzogchen practice, just dissolving it. Or it may involve applying a particular kind of countermeasure. For example, with anger, applying a countermeasure of trying to see that other person. So first of all, we acknowledge, and then we try to counteract the emotion, dissolving it or.
Are you fond of Tara Brach's approach?
I am not very familiar with you. Are you talking about rain?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like recognizing it and acknowledging it is the second, right? And then, I don't remember all of that. I mean, I think that's a start. I think, you know, that really involves mindfulness and not judging. I think that that approach oftentimes is not enough. I think it's, the thing is, the mental affliction is always an exaggeration of something, right? And so I think like the Galuk way of really trying to look at the situation accurately and applying an antidote is sometimes necessary, rather than just kind of being mindful and non-judgmental about it.
I find in the investigation phase, sometimes I start reifying the whole storyline that got me there. So,
Yeah, yeah. So we want to try to not do that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? Looking at our history and looking at, okay, well, you know, yeah. Oh, well, this is happening because, you know, my parents didn't do this, you know, didn't pay attention to me, or, yeah, that can be really tricky. It can be really tricky. I mean, it can be useful to understand it, but we have to try to do it without falling into the emotional pattern, right? Like, did you have more behind your question about rain?
oh no, I was just curious what you thought of it. It seems helpful sometimes, but it's not, at the other time, I really liked your response because it doesn't seem to quite quell the reoccurrence of the affliction. I think it eases some of the pressure and pain, you know, when you do that, you know, especially the non-identification part, right?
Yeah.
That's, you know.
Non-identification, right? When the anger arises, and not think that
I am
I'm
angry.
the person, right? It's just anger coming and going, and hopefully going sooner rather than later.
Right.
Yeah, 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 and yeah. I think a limitation. I mean, I think the mindfulness movement is great, and it's helped so many people. And I think it's limited in what it can do, because it's not, you know, getting at the underlying problem. Exaggeration, imperfect.
I'm super struck by the second arrow kind of idea that there's the initial cause of whatever the disturbance or pain is, and then the whole dialogue or narrative that you repeat to yourself is just sort of doubling down on the whole suffering thing.
Right. It's like the difference between pain and suffering, right? It's sometimes
Right.
that way, right? The pain, you know, sometimes we say the pain is inevitable, but the suffering is what we add on top of it, right? Perseverating in the mental affliction of the emotional.
Yeah, I mean, pain's just part of the gig, right?
It will be for quite a while, yeah.
Old age, suffering, and death, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to happen.
Samsara, yeah, that pain will still happen. At least we can try to work with our minds, right, and not add the suffering on top. All right. And then just some general, some general ways of dealing with the afflictions. So we're not going to get in. I was going to talk about attachment today, but we'll do that next week. Yeah, so first we'll try not to feed the affliction. So, right, the mindfulness way of observing, right, developing some distance, you know, standing back from the whatever's happening in our minds, right, and you're just observing, right, like sometimes, right, so when somebody really does something that I find really, you know, objectionable. And sometimes, you know, that just the recording, the negative recording, just, oh, I can't believe what he did. And it can be useful to just get some distance from that, right? It's like, it's hard to stop that from happening completely. Like, if we can stop it, you know, and apply an antidote to stop it, that's great, that's preferable. But sometimes nothing we will do will stop that. And it's useful to just, take a step back and let it just do its thing. Kind of let the toddler run around until they exhaust themselves, right? Let your mind, do its thing until it exhausts itself, and just don't feed it, right? Don't get involved in it. Don't feed it. Don't justify it. But, just kind of watch it like you're watching a movie, and, with some distance. That can be super helpful, So that's a way we can deal with mental afflictions in general. And I find that that's a way that can help us be a little bit less exhausted. Like, I remember a period when I thought, well, applying antidotes to the afflictions is what I have to do all the time. And it's exhausting, right? It's like antidote, 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 antidote. It's like you don't have time to do anything else, right? And so, it can be useful just let the recording, right? It's like, let the craving for ice cream just kind of, go through your mind without like engaging it and following it. Or, sometimes we'll follow it. But just having a distance from that and not engaging it, that's a lot less exhausting than applying an antidote. But of course, if the affliction is strong enough, then we need to apply it.
What's super helpful for me, I think this is my personality, is just to see the repetitiveness and the tiresomeness of some of my thought habitual patterns. This is so incredibly dull. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like we're watching the same TV show on repeat, for the 100th or 1000th time. It's like, oh, there it is again. Seen that before.
Yeah, anything but that.
Humor about it is very helpful too. Thank you. And then another thing, just like remembering impermanence, like remembering the impermanence of the emotion. It's kind of like what John was saying earlier, the non-identification, right? The emotion, it's arising for the moment. It's not going to be there forever. It's impermanent. It's like a cloud, right? The cloud in the sky. If we don't feed it, it'll go away by itself. And also remember the impermanence of the situation. Super helpful. Right? The president isn't going to be president forever. This, pandemic, right? Not going to be there forever, right? This challenging situation that we're going to be there forever. Yeah. Well, my clock says it's time. Yeah, that's probably a good place to stop for today, and then we'll continue on with attachment and maybe anger next time, and then we'll go into the 12th. So let's dedicate. Yeah, so dedicate any positive energy we've created. May it help further our own practice, develop qualities of compassion and patience. Let go of our mental affliction. Ultimately attain complete able to really deeply let's dedicate for more and more peace in the world. This pandemic to subside, for our president, whether we agree with him or not. He's our fellow human being. He wants to be happy. He's our brother. Completely recover. All beings devoted. All beings who are sick. All beings who are suffering in any way. Quickly be free from their suffering. And they follow the path to genuine. Thank you. Have a good